Me introduce Christine, because we're both from the same country. They're very different parts from it. Christine lives a long way from me. So Christine was the parliamentary leader of the Australian Greens. She's been our only woman parliamentary leader so far. She's from the state of Tasmania, which is the most southern state, and she also was a senator representative down in Tasmania for a very long time too. And so Christine has had to work in some very tough conditions and some very tough situations, but she's always been very strategic and very good at finding the right issue and ways to move issues forward inside parties, which can be a big challenge, as we've all discussed today. So what I'm going to do is pass over to Christine. Some of you have met Christine at Global Greens, like Naja, I think you've met Christine. And Anita, you might have as well. And so I'll pass over to Christine, who's going to talk to us as our keynote speaker today. Thanks, Christine.
Thanks very much, Michelle, and hello everyone, and congratulations for this big effort of coming together to think about women's leadership, and particularly in the Greens. I know it's a really hard time for many people because of coronavirus around the world, and I know that Iran, for example, has been hit particularly hard. So I hope you're all safe and well wherever you are in the region. Now, I wanted to start off and talk about how important this particular moment of time is. It's really critical when you think about politics and what's possible to have a real sense of what is going on around the world. Is there an open opportunity to do things differently more than at other times? And I would argue that at the moment, there is a huge opportunity for new ideas, new leadership, and so it should suit women who have not got the old traditional ideas of leadership, have not been part of a lot of the problems that have been created over the last 50 years. And so that opportunity for diversity, new voices, different styles presents right now more so than it has in my whole experience of politics. And I say that because what the coronavirus has done has exposed the fact that the institutional structures we have around the world, in politics particularly, are just not fit for purpose. Our economics is not fit for purpose. We have not got the institutions to deal with a civilization-wide catastrophe. And it's been my experience in politics that when that happens, the people with the right ideas, the best ideas on the table win. So the context at the moment is really incredibly important. Will we go back to business as usual in politics, or are we going to see something different? And South Korea has, and I saw a couple of you from South Korea on this in this discussion today, and it must be incredibly disappointing that when the government was on the nose because of various scandals and so on, that the opportunity of the coronavirus to give focus to the ruling party meant that in the election they were returned with an even greater majority than they had before. And that just goes to this point of context. Its timing often is everything in politics, but I think we can take from it right now that women are well placed to actually step up and be listened to in a way that we may not have been listened to before. Second point I want to make is that politics is not an end in itself. It is the vehicle we use to bring about change. And green politics is no different in that sense than any other form of politics. Green parties are there to bring about change in the way we regard the environment, social justice, peace and non-violence, and the way we actually conduct ourselves in politics by trying to include as many people as possible. So the first thing I wanted to do was to ask you in the chat box to write down what is the thing that has driven you personally, standing up and wanting to make a change. What is it? What issue? What element of values, if you like, drove you to say, right, that's it. I have to get involved in politics in some way. That's really important, to go into politics with a clear idea of what it is you want to change about the world and why the Greens have been the political vehicle that you have chosen to do that. When you've considered why you've really done what you've done to take the stand you have, to get involved to the extent that you have already, the next thing to think about is, well, if you want to bring about that change, which level in politics is it actually better for you to focus on? Is it that you want to ultimately be an elected representative, and if so, at local, at state, or at national level? What would suit you and your agenda in those areas best? And then, or is it that you want to build the party so that you don't necessarily want to be a candidate yourself and go into elected office, but you may want to build the institutional structure that will enable other people to do it, but your particular ideas to finally get expression in policy? Now, you need to have thought that through right now, because as you approach the development of your political party and how you position yourself in that party, you need to have decided which way you're going to, what it is you want to achieve at the end, because that will determine which role you take in your particular political party, because either way, you have to build a profile in your political party. You also have to know or think about, well, what sort of leader do you want to be? What are the characteristics of leadership that you think are the right characteristics of leadership? Now, I'm pretty sure most of you will reject the top-down authoritarian leadership that so many of us have had to deal with over the years. But in thinking about how you interact with other people, are you a leader that values inclusion, diversity? Are you a person who can deal with strong people of different opinion? What are your particular strengths that you bring to leadership? Because that will determine in some ways the role that you take in the political party, because there are so many different roles, and it's no use just drifting from one to the other. Once you know what sort of leadership you admire, what sort of leadership you think you can offer, what level of government you're thinking about being involved in, or if you're just in the party, then you can move forward. So teamwork is pretty important in any of those things. So how do you build a team? How do you engage a team? Are you the sort of person who brings on other people? Because I think that is a key to leadership. It's certainly something I tried very hard to do in Australian politics, and that is look around the table at all of the people in my team and basically say, I want you to be as good as you possibly can be, and lift the whole team, as opposed to other leaders who sometimes alienate others in order to strengthen their own position. So you need to think about those things. There are other issues you need to think about. Are you potentially a good fundraiser? Are you an organiser? Are you good at public speaking, or would you like to be better at public speaking? Because one of the ways in which political parties now operate more so than they have ever done before is in community organising. It's essentially the model that Obama used to be elected, to have a whole team of people across the United States organising at the local level to support his campaign. There is a particular skill in being a volunteer organiser, organising those teams. Completely different skills required for fundraising, completely different skills required for being a candidate. So you need to think about what your skills are as to what position you should take, because in order to advance your influence in the party, you need to be able to demonstrate, to showcase to other people that you can do things and that you're successful in doing them. And let me also tell you that if you get out there and do some of those things, it will also build your confidence to do a lot more, because that's important. The other area of skills that I think is really important is digital skills. This is an issue of varying capacity around the world, but it is essential. If you are going to build influence inside the party, inside the community, generally you have to develop for yourself a profile in the digital world, and you need to know how to use all the tools of the digital world and keep up with them. That, I have to say, is a real challenge for me, and I'm not up with it at all these days, not nearly as much as I would like to be. But you only have to look now in the pandemic to see how many people are resorting to webinars instead of the public meetings they might have had before, or the rallies they might have had before. There is an opportunity to go global through the online platforms. And I would urge all of you in building your networks, apart from a lot of people are on Facebook, I understand. But if you're going to build a network, you need to influence the people who make decisions. The Twitter sphere is where that happens. You need to start following the journalists who are influential, particularly in the areas that you are particularly keen on. You need to follow the opinion leaders, because the big advantage now that wasn't there when I started in my political career is that you can directly message people at any level, anywhere in the world, and have yourself recognised as an opinion leader in your field. That was never possible before, but it is possible. And if you want to demonstrate to people in your own political party, in your own country, that you are a thought leader, you are up with it, you are engaged, then you need a network in the social media sphere, as well as at the personal and local and direct engagement sphere. When you think about what's holding you back from being able to take on the next role, I'd put it into several categories. There's the personal, of course. People often don't feel confident enough. And as I said before, the best way of overcoming fear and lack of confidence is actually putting your hand up and trying it, because any level of success will give you confidence to move to the next level. Build your skills base. And as I said, develop some fundraising skills. But also, does the structure of your political party, the way that it's been set up, enable the kind of leadership and engagement that you would like to offer? And if not, what can you do about building a network in your political party to change the constitution to enable the structures to be different? Because often when political parties are set up, the structure isn't appropriate after a decade or so for what is required now. Also the culture, and that's where I think it's really important to build the women's network that you're building now. often political parties reflect the culture, or always actually, the culture in which they evolve. So even though green politics is global, it differs at each country level depending on the cultural context. So if you're in a culture and where male authoritarian leadership is the norm, then there's going to be an expectation, probably by the people who set up the party, that that will be reflected in the structures. And that's where it's important to get organised and get the membership numbers to change the constitutions to enable the kind of leadership that you want to offer. And one of the advantages of the very strong gender equality perspective in the Greens is there is an expectation that there will be women in leadership positions, often as co-conveners, co-organisers at various levels. And if there is a leadership team where there are no shared positions, then at least there will be a mix of men and women in those positions, and you have to ensure that the structure enables that to happen so that women are able to rise to those positions. Otherwise, the structure will just replicate the culture, which means that women won't be able to advance in the way that we'd like to. In terms of my own journey, just to illustrate some of these things, I was a teacher. I wasn't involved in politics, but I was passionate about protection of the environment, and I got involved in conservation groups and attended a lot of rallies and meetings and built a network in the conservation movement, as I hope many of you have built networks in the various movements on the issue about which you're passionate. That was in the 1970s in Tasmania, where environment was really coming into its own. I then became involved in the campaign to save the Franklin River in Tasmania from a major hydroelectric power dam. In the course of that campaign, I was arrested while I was protesting and ended up in jail for a few days. And what that taught me was that I could actually survive that and manage that, which gave me an enormous amount of confidence to continue to be involved in direct action and protest. I went back teaching though, however, and probably would have stayed teaching had a major pulp mill not been proposed in the district in which I was brought up. And it was a native forest-based pulp mill, and it was a chlorine-based pulp mill, so it would have destroyed forests and had mega adverse pollution environmental effects. I tried to get the environment movement interested in opposing this particular pulp mill, but they were all busy with other campaigns at the time and more or less said, well, if you want someone to do something about it, you're going to have to do it yourself. And so I did. And I organised a group of farmers, and I organised fishermen, and I organised a whole lot of groups who had an interest in forests and the clean environment and produce, etc., clean produce. And we built a statewide movement which ended up with me getting into standing for politics as an independent and being elected. Once I got into politics at the state level, so that's at the Tasmanian subnational level in Australia, and became involved in campaigns for gay law reform, gun law reform and so on, then I took strong stands on all of those. We had a small number of people in the party, and when the leader at the time left, I took over the leadership. It was difficult because I was the first woman to lead a political party in Tasmania, and there was a lot of, if you don't like it, go back to the kitchen, and you couldn't ever demonstrate or any weakness or regret about not being able to spend as much time as you'd like at home with the family and the rest. That has changed over the years, I'm pleased to say, although no doubt that in varying degrees that would be reflected in this particular region still in some places. However, I persisted in Tasmanian politics, but my focus became much more strongly on global warming. I recognised that all the victories we'd had protecting national parks and forests and the like would stand for nothing if we didn't deal with global warming, because ultimately everything would be destroyed. And so global warming is essentially a national policy position, obviously a global issue, but at the national level you can have the greatest level of influence. And that's why I ran for the federal party and got into Australian national politics and took a focused lead throughout all that time on global warming, took over the leadership. And when the opportunity arose and the Greens were in balance of power in Australia with a Labor government, which didn't have a majority, then I was able to have a lot of the policy positions of the Greens on global warming made as national policy. One of the things that assisted me through those years is the network I was able to build of expertise, because none of us can possibly know enough at enough detail on all the issues that we want to be able to influence. So one of the strong recommendations I have is to start, and social media gives you an opportunity to do it, to start building a network of experts in the field in which you want to take a particular interest, and start following those people, engaging with those people, because over time you'll find, particularly academics, are very keen to engage with policy people who have a capacity to deliver those policies into legislation at some level in various countries. So that was a really important thing for me. They weren't necessarily party members, frequently they weren't, but they were experts in their field. Once I left politics, I was invited to be the Global Greens ambassador, and I very much like that role, but what holds me back in being able to do more is I don't have an independent source of income to be able to enable me to visit the countries where there are Green parties, some 90 countries in the world. And also it's the culture of the Greens. It comes back to that, where the Greens in developing countries largely, and I have to say as far as developed countries are concerned, Australia and New Zealand are exceptions in this. You find with many of the European Green parties, their focus is almost entirely on Europe. Their aid budgets are directed towards Africa, so they've spent a bit of time supporting Green parties in Africa. But you don't have in the Global Greens the level of support for globalised engagement that I would like to see, and I think that we would all like to see. And so that's one of the issues, that to build the profile and the importance of the Global Greens. And that's why I was so looking forward to South Korea hosting the Global Greens conference next year. And it remains to be seen how that may pan out, and we may have to do it digitally. I'm not engaged in those discussions. But really, really important that we see the development of national Green parties, regional Green parties like the European Greens in the Parliament there, and then the global Greens as highly significant entities. And so when you're thinking about your engagement with the Greens, think about it at the local level, at the national level, but also at the global level, because systemic change requires all of us internationally to come together. And as I said, at this moment in time, there is a recognition that our global institutions are not up to it, and that we need to change those global institutions, which means the Greens has to be a strong global voice in that context. So I'll leave it there and go over to questions that you might have. But I just want to, again, congratulate you all for the effort you're putting into building the Greens and the work you're putting into making sure that you can play a significant part in that development of the Greens. So thank you very much.